You've really never gotten Baldy to the top before?
Never got the boulder to the top, not even once. Always tumbles down right at the very end. Lost count after the 19,000th time or so. But you know what? One of these days, I bet it's going to stick.
Loop games, aka roguelikes, roguelites, or just games where you start over. I don't think I have to sing the praises or bash the idea, because whether you like them or not, you can't deny that they're quite common these days. But just in case you happen to click on this video without that context, which, thank you, but roguelikes are any games that upon failing or getting a game over, you're forced to start over from the beginning. And roguelites are the same thing, but instead with elements carrying over between these game overs. Which, this is strangely one of the most bizarre phenomenon, as they are games that require lots of repetitive action, which would seemingly dissuade any ability to create a narrative pattern with, but here we are. For the sake of transparency, I should say that I really adore this concept of games. From Slay the Spire to Wizard of Legend to our thumbnail game Hades, I really can't get enough of this. Maybe I just like the concept of smashing my head against a wall enough times until eventually a few bricks fall and I find another wall to smash my head against. But if I can best articulate why I like this style of game, is mostly just because roguelites are a genre of game that I feel handles fail conditions and failure with impressive ability. You know how in games when you take too many bullets or fall into a hole and you just kind of start back at the last checkpoint? I can't help but feel during those moments the disconnect between myself and the game, because the protagonist isn't failing in these moments, I am, the player. In Uncharted, when Nathan Drake dies, it isn't canon, and theoretically, Nathan Drake, outside of a cutscene, never dies or even fails like that. Thus, during these huge cinematic chase scenes full of danger, the possibility of failure, whether it be being shot or falling off the plane, it splits the narrative for me. It splits into two stories, the narrative arc of the game's scripted story and my experience playing. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some games have scripted stories that are still really charming and fun despite my time playing it, while also some games with a limited narrative allow for stories to be made while playing with friends or experiencing some type of glitch. But I think there's a special type of magic that happens when a story and experience do overlap and weave between one another, where the gameplay mechanics enforce the narrative and so my experience as a player parallels with the story. Of course, that's pretty obvious, but like I said, this is where I come back to roguelites. When I fail as a player in a roguelite, the game continues onwards, keeping that failure in storied history. The game over and checkpoint restart isn't going to functionally forget about my failure, but instead create a shared understanding of it, while also allowing me to keep playing the game. And this, everyone, is where we arrive at our center point title, Hades.
You've been through so much, don't you ever... You could just drink deeply of the river of forgetfulness and be done with, no?
It has been rather tempting, yes. And I have taken sips from time to time. But I've some memories I'm not quite ready to give up on yet.
For those that might not know, which maybe please go give it a play first, but Hades is a roguelite by Supergiant Games where you take on protagonist Zagreus, son of the titular character Hades from Greek mythology. Upon learning that his mother Persephone is somewhere above the underworld, Zagreus finds a conviction to beat and fight past the legions of servants and guards under Hades' control. When you die in the game, you are brought back to the very bottom of the underworld and you are forced to start the whole run over. In between these runs, you may converse, gift, and flirt with several recognizable people and gods from the shared mythology. Hades is by far my 2020 game of the year, and I've been wondering since then how I'm going to talk about it. Because there are so many interesting things about how this game reimagines Greek mythology into a work drama, dysfunctional family narrative, how this game's managed to make 6 different weapon types blend with several styles of play, but I think now, I found a few specific key choices and feelings that are prevalent throughout Hades that made it more than just a fun isometric beat-em-up style game with good writing. Hades is a game about the stillness and narrative beats in between our failures, whether it be the tiny moments we make a harmless mistake that results in a large spiral, the large, powerful, omnipresent problem that lurks above us, the struggles with communicating our complicated feelings to the people we love, and the certain struggles of our day that we simply can't overcome. Hades is a powerful story that does not take shortcuts to try and earn its emotional story, and guess what? It's also really fun to play.
Do not despair, child. Such setbacks are inevitable and may be overcome with effort and with time.
I began this video with talking about roguelites and game overs, where instead of just reverting back to a checkpoint, Hades instead says, what if when you failed, you actually did? every single time you die in Hades, you are forced to watch the same cutscene of Zagreus getting out of a pool of blood, going over to Hypnos, the god of sleep, and hear him react to whatever slip-up you made this time. Or more simply, the game reacts to your failure. Hypnos, the ever-present, unhelpful little brother, would always obnoxiously ask why I died to such an easily avoidable spike trap.
So you got skewered by a spike trap out there, huh? Well, that's too bad. Have you tried not standing there, like when the spikes come out?
I have not.
A notion that's equal parts annoying and characteristically appropriate, and he's not even the only one. Nyx, our surrogate mother, will comment about new plot revelations, Megaera of the Furies and first level boss will comment about your repeated victories over her, and Achilles, famous hero, will comment about whatever weapon I take with me. All this to say, the story does not stop when I fail. Unlike Nathan Drake, who gets rewound back and narratively cleared that jump in the first time, Zagreus fails and works the same amount I do during runs. There's no disconnect between the experience of Zagreus finally reaching the third area of Elysium and dying to the difficulty spike and my own ignorance of the enemy's attack patterns, which, of course is no different than Dark Souls, which is also a game about repeated failure, but where Dark Souls had the chosen undead, a lifeless avatar, Hades has Zagreus, our fun-loving layabout prince of the underworld, whose charming commentary about the various areas and enemies does more to align me with him rather than drive us apart.
I hope the fates are nicer to you next time.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope you're ready for some more of the real thing there, Than, because I got you some and I won't be taking what is this, Zag, for an answer.
What is this? Come on already, Zagreus. Are you just messing with me now?
Despite my knowing you are always late for everything, here you've outdone yourself by quite some time.
Oh, shut up and get your fork. And burn away that regal cape and let's get to this then. I had no idea you had all these capes to spare. Must have a whole entire storage chamber full of them.
I always think about how important giving a protagonist a perspective is, and because the writing and dialogue is written around Zagreus' failure, it sharpens the narrative idea of him being able to react to the world around him. Unlike in Dark Souls, where the chosen undead is mostly spoken towards, it's because of those emotional stakes and that emotional reactability that the game's able to capture through this staggered conversation a feeling that I just don't think is possible in other media formats. A feeling that is repetitive in nature and really difficult to depict. A feeling that I simply call the stillness. Now, this isn't a real term, this is solely a next entry terminology, but if I could best put it into simple terms, the stillness is the quiet phenomenon one experiences after a heightened emotion. For real-world reference, every time I've had a big breakup, I'll call friends and we'll talk, and maybe we'll play games to get my mind off of it, but that doesn't change that eventually they'll hang up, and I'm back to being alone with my thoughts. Those moments when I'm forced to stare at my ceiling and just think for an hour before bed, or whenever, is the stillness. The next day at work, when I go through my whole day with the emotional emptiness of what just happened, that's the stillness. And I don't think non-interactive media can quite capture that. The stillness is largely the moments in media where the camera cuts, or when the chapter of a book ends, after the couple breaks up and one of them leaves the scene, when characters try to go to bed, or just whenever the ability to follow the character would be too lengthy to show the whole process. Because, yeah, nobody wants to watch a character struggle to fall asleep and stare at their clock for 30 minutes before eventually they're just not awake anymore. Movies aren't going to give up 30 minutes of screen time for that, and authors can't write the repetitive nature of being stuck in a single thought for longer than is interesting. But that being said, this is arguably just as human of a journey as the event of heightened emotion. And it's very important to understand the atmosphere of those feelings. And while, all games don't do it perfectly, I do think Hades captures this exact feeling. Not just with the gameplay loop of failure, although, staying with Zagreus from the moment he starts his journey to the end is huge, but also with how Hades tells the story of Zagreus' relationship to the rest of the characters. As previously mentioned, Hades reacts to your failure. It doesn't matter how close you get or if you got an interesting narrative beat, either way, if you fail, you go back to the House of Hades. And that indifferent, never-ending atmosphere of the gameplay loop is a method of showing the stillness. Fighting Hades at the end of the game and getting so close but dying is infuriating because having to go all the way back makes you simmer on that frustration. It creates an entirely new experience that isn't just hitting retry. It understands that the process of getting there and stewing on those emotions, trying to figure out your next build, maybe trying something different, only to get another try again, is just as important to the satisfaction of beating Hades as, learning his attack patterns or getting that right build. It ceases to just be a gameplay challenge, but the story itself of Zagreus' escape. And because we never leave Zagreus during any of this, those many tries all become your Zagreus' canon story. It took him just as many tries as it took you, and whatever number that first escape success is, doesn't really matter. Whether that number be 15 or 48 or 73, the release and guttural rush of escaping is only earned by experiencing that stillness with Zagreus. It's a sentiment I've seen several in the Hades community voice, that it doesn't matter how many tries it takes. All that matters is that you did it.
I told you that I would, Father. And I'm going to. Goodbye.
All of this kind of works in tandem with all the other narrative systems to make each player's experience of the game unique. For me, I'll never forget having escaped a few times and finally meeting my mom, Persephone. At this point, escaping wasn't new to me anymore, but I was desperate to see her again, and talking afterwards with her felt like such a reward. Only this time, because of the danger of being discovered scared her, Persephone asked Zagreus, and me as an extension, to not come back, which, of course, we objected to, but we were sent back home before we could argue. And I felt conflicted, and I was sitting on an entire stack of nectar, so I decided to try and plead with my father by finally trying to give him some nectar as a peace offering. Maybe it would make my next climb easier.
Hey, Father, I thought maybe, here.
Where did you get this? You think you can butter me up with such trifles? Give me that, and then get out of here.
You're welcome, Father.
An attempt that was swiftly denied and of course thrown back at me, so feeling ridiculous and justified that Hades was every bit as insufferable as I thought, I went to speak to my mentor Achilles, who never failed to inspire me. Except this time I spoke with Achilles about Patroclus and their ashes being mixed, and he got frustrated and upset with me. I apologized and he seemed to accept it, but I couldn't shake this, bubbling irritability. And then when I went to speak to Nyx, which morphed into an argument about my friend Deuce's job, I left my routine checkup time with everyone kind of miserable, and I decided I'd stick to what I was good with, which was breaking through my dad's security defenses. And during this time, my crush Thanatos decided to say hello, but in these more recent attempts to get closer to him, he was scared off and he disappeared before I could say anything more.
I never said anything like that. You know what? There's a bunch of mortals I have to go fetch. Goodbye.
All of my relationships around me felt like they were beginning to deteriorate, but what really encapsulated all of this struggle and failure is that when I reached the top of this attempt, I faced Hades and lost. I lost my escape streak. I lost my dad for the first time in a long time, and I was kind of upset about it. I walked out of the pool and just stood there for a bit, not saying hello to Hypnos, not pausing the game, not talking to anyone. I just stood there, idle and frustrated. I almost wanted to skip speaking to anyone and just try again to break free from this place of which there was no escape.
You're just going to stay here, alone in the middle of nowhere, in this little garden, forever.
This is my home now, yes. While your home is below. Please, if not for your sake, then for mine, do not return. I love you, Zagreus. Goodbye.
Mother, blast.
And truth be told, I stopped playing because it was probably like 1:30 in the morning, but this isn't just a certain story flags happening to line up or my own lucky coincidence. This is Hades' design systems working as intended, one that understands the turmoil Zagreus and the player undergo. Don't be mistaken, this story isn't with great strife comes greater success kind of narrative. No, the satisfaction comes from the game facilitating and allowing failure and allowing you to know that one mistake or string of miscommunications isn't the end of the story. And the game lingering on the stillness of your failure and your climb back to the top isn't boring, but essential to the developing narrative. Essential because without this seemingly impossible task, because at the beginning of the game, much like the first moments of Stillness, the daunting nature of that climb seems impossible. Yet slowly you begin to break down the climb until eventually you start making your own fun along your way to the top. And more importantly, you begin to connect more with your supporting cast. Because to wrap all this together, in between the fun and constructed gameplay of the main story is a heart that connects the stillness and fail conditions we've been talking about, when you're stuck in a loop. One big turn of Hades is that you can't escape, right? Zagreus, despite all that effort, cannot leave the underworld. He is stuck, always doomed to die and go back. But, Hades is optimistic and has a more deeply kind perspective and offers a more nuanced glimpse into this larger loop narrative.
You mean you're really going to stay, even though you don't have to?
Is that so odd, Highness? Don't see myself logging all boldly out of here besides. And if I were to leave, why, we would not be having these exchanges now and then. I happen to enjoy them quite a bit. Now, here you go, and thank you very much.
Because, well, interacting and communicating with people is hard, and
To think discussing feelings would be even harder than annihilating Father's forces.
the relationships you form with your family and the various people you meet during Hades are not a quick friendship. If anything, it's a much, much slower burn. In fact, so slow that you could finish the main story long before you finish any side character story, which, maybe some people only did the main story, but I didn't. Because after a long time, I just wanted to see those narratives come to a conclusion as much as I wanted to see them happy. Nearly each side character became like a friend, and, much like actual friends, you don't quite realize you're being endeared to someone as it's happening. You just sort of click, and like everything in this game, I don't think you get that without the long beats of stillness in between interacting with the cast. Dialogue in Hades, while really good, is generally only about 4 or so exchanges from characters till you part ways. But there's something meaningful about each of the interactions.
Just let him know I said to risk it all.
Risk it all? Risk what all? He wants what's best for you. He wouldn't want anything to happen.
It's already long since happened. I dare say that right now, provided what you've said is true, then it appears we've more to gain than lose. Isn't fear for the weak?
And why? Well, it's pretty obvious, because all of these characters of great myth have failed. All of them, from Orpheus failing to save Eurydice, to Achilles failing to save Patroclus, to Hypnos failing at his job. All of them are in a similar cycle to Zagreus and the player. And they, like you, are also going through the motions of their own failure. Whether it be suffering from some unfair circumstance or punishing themselves, all of them are struggling, and that emotional honesty and reflection only is foreseen through countless conversations with them that might be completely unexpected or properly built up to. This is so much the magic of Hades' writing, because if anything, when Zagreus tries to rush forgiveness from the individuals he interacts with, whether it be towards him or towards each other, they generally get upset with him.
You seem to have a lot to say to him. Is there anything I can do?
So let me see if I understand. Orpheus blew it with me like an idiot, but now I'm supposed to be reaching out to him. Sorry, hun, but that's not happening. The two of us are finished.
Won't you at least try to reach out to them?
It is for Chaos to reach out to me if they wish to reacquaint themselves with me. Child, it would please me if we spoke no more of this for now.
I see. I'm sorry to have troubled you. He blames himself for what happened to you, I figured he failed to defend you or something, not that he didn't fight at all. Although he said something about how, once you died, he shortly followed in a rage.
I wouldn't know a thing about that, stranger, for you see, I was already dead.
So even down to this supporting cast, Hades understands that, like fighting legions of enemies and leveling up, intimacy, forgiveness, and emotionally satisfying arcs take some time. They take having to fail numerous times, and miscommunicate, and be vulnerable and uncomfortable around you, and borderline fail to see themselves to a natural conclusion.
You're asking my consent to give me yet another lavish gift. Sure, permission granted. Though what makes you think that your approach this time is going to be any more successful than the last?
I don't know that it will. I never really know exactly where I stand with you. But I know how I feel. And I'd rather be upfront with you, even if it means risking our relationship such as it is.
One of my favorite examples being Sisyphus, who, upon learning that his new great friend, myself, is dating one or both the people responsible for making his time in Tartarus more difficult, needs to take a moment to collect himself on it. He doesn't immediately accept it, and just like with the other runs, it took me a few runs to bump into him again. And for him to accept that this is true, and because he's the sweetest man alive, he told me that he'll try to understand why I like them.
Oh, I believe it, Highness. I should think that bringing death must be a lonely job. Perhaps you ought to try pushing a boulder sometime.
And I really want to reiterate that this is not some crying call for games to be longer. No, because Hades is not a long game. It can be if you do everything, but the real truth is that the writing implies that the time does pass in between runs. It implies that the world keeps moving while you fight your way down the hordes of enemies. It implies that characters ponder and think about your relationship in the moments when you're not together. It slow burns by simply implying a world constantly in motion that allows for those quiet moments in between to be captured. It's not about the amount of time spent with a single beat, but instead about the quality of these moments. Hades treats every single moment of this game as one with purpose, so they can have the same gameplay loop that narratively shifts from an impossible climb to a fun time challenge. The cast, who starts off as people who just give you buffs, turn into friends that you sometimes rely on and cheer so you can finish your run. Even the momentary pause after you clear rooms begins with you pondering about the next best course of action, but ends with you just hurrying through doors. So much so that you start missing out on those precious gold urns. Or just simply, Hades is a game about the stillness and narrative beats in between our failures. Whether it be the tiny moments we make a harmless mistake that results in a large spiral, the large, powerful, omnipresent problem that lurks above us, the struggles with communicating our complicated feelings to the people we love, and the certain struggles of our day that we simply can't overcome. Hades is a powerful story that does not take shortcuts to try and earn its emotional story, and guess what? It's also really fun to play. So, is Hades a story about a loop existing within a loop? Yes, which, after the last few years, definitely hits different. But Supergiant instead offered the simple solution that for all the large sweeping motions that remain constant, all the failures that exist within our lives, the relationships we have to our world, whether it be in our tasks to the people we love, are in constant motion. That despite the larger cruel fate that none of us can quite escape, the tiny moments of getting to catch up with a friend, the tiny moments we get to spend with our loved ones, do matter. If anything, that's what makes the whole loop worth it, because you get to experience those joys each time.
They live with all their hearts, or at least try. If only they knew what your father always says about all this.
What, you mean that there is no escape? From what? The mortals are up there, not here. Not while they're technically alive in their sense, anyway.
I mean, you can't escape your problems, Zagreus. You can run from your family, but you can't run from everything. You have no choice but to confront it and work through it, sooner or later, one way or another. You and all of us.
But for now, that's all I got. Thank you very much, Supergiant, for making such a good game, and thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.